It's spring. Rosann, it's spring. Isn't that great?
I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
This is my favorite month out of all the months that can be. This is my favorite month. I think when it's been a really long winter, this is the month that we start to see some changes. Sometimes we'll get really hot days and then we'll go back to cold, but we'll
Yes.
start to see that change. And I need that change. I need that warmth to come in. And when I see the warmth, I start thinking of planting. What am I going to do to plant? So I am thrilled to talk about this month, but you need to explain some things for us.
Yes.
The bull, the breast, and the bowels.
I know. The first time somebody said to me, and I've told this story before, but it was such a shocking moment. I was in the garden 4 blocks from downtown Dahlonega, our campus seed garden. And they said, if you plant them taters when the signs are in the bowels, they're going to rot. I heard bowels and rot. And I said, thank you, sir, or something really like, please don't stop, go away. Well, as it turned out, he may be watching. His name was Mr. Johnny, and he is the one that really helped us decode. He literally spent hours at a time in the classroom. Because today we say Capricorn, or we say Pisces, and we usually say it about ourselves.
Yeah.
I'm Libra. What are you? This is not that. This has nothing to do with natal, your birth date, your fortune, nothing. This is it's a type of astrology. Although I want to make it clear, Appalachians would not use that word astrology. At least not the Appalachians that I hang out with.
I mean, it was literally that whole section of newspaper would be ripped out. You would not see it.
Yes. And so why is it that we're still relying on a remnant of information that's been around since the Middle Ages? And I just read that somebody saw this man of many signs. And Sandy, if you'll flip over to the to my Instagram, you can see that this is what my friend was talking about. This is an icon. Someone just discovered that it was in cuneiform, so it's been around a long time. So what this is called 𝗕𝗿𝗶𝗹, the art, or the way that people have assigned body parts with zodiac signs. Again, this is not what you're going to hear from someone who practices this as part of their tradition. But I want you to know, because if you get a calendar or an almanac, you won't see those words that we see when the moon is in Capricorn. That's a great time to plant. Instead, you'll see a little goat, and you'll see something called the knees. That's what will be on your calendar. And so it took me forever to understand. It's like, this is the code. This is part of the code. You don't have to say the word zodiac. And part of the code is it is just a shortcut, just like we all lawyers speaking code, educators speaking code. Wiki tree.
Genealogists speaking code. We all speak in code.
Yes, somebody said, "Oh, they're going to be wrought today," and I said, "Shouldn't we call somebody about that?" I mean, that doesn't sound.
Do they need medicine?
Yes. So when someone is saying, "Don't plant potatoes when the signs are in the bowels," what they mean is, don't plant when the moon is in Virgo, because again, this has nothing to do with when or where you were born. It has to do with where the moon is in the zodiac.
And you're absolutely correct. Our ancestors definitely would not sit there on the porch, drinking a pop and sitting there talking, well, don't plant while the moon is in Virgo. That is something we would never hear. But they would say, as you said, hey, Don't be planting those in the bowels. They're going to rot. And if you think about that sentence, yeah, okay. I think you're
Yeah,
right.
really. Okay. I mean, that's where food rots in general, right?
Yeah.
But I wanted to add the bull to that, because remember, you'll either see on the calendar, the first day of the sign, you'll see either the body part, the words thighs, heart, arms, or you'll see the little animal, or if it's not an animal like Libra, it's the scales. You'll see a and this is think of this as decoding. And for a long time, I had to keep a list. I had to keep this man of many signs, or uh, he goes by many names. The main thing I want to tell you about this guy is be careful when you Google him, because you'll get some men and you'll get some of the signs, but that is not what we're talking about.
It's
Just
not
be,
planting by the signs. It's a different type of garden.
it's something else, and we're not going to go there. So when you learn these rules, you can learn the rules. I can say to you, the time to make changes is a dark moon and the signs are going out of the body. Okay, that's a rule. What does that mean? Well, a dark moon simply means any time after the full moon, but before the new moon. And that's why every time I flip a page, and I think I wrote about this in a recent Instagram post, I always locate that new moon, and I locate the full moon. And then I locate the other two, that last quarter and first quarter, because that orients me to that month. And this is one of those years that we're having a lot of sometimes two periods of dark moons, two periods that the moon appears to be getting smaller. And if you remember from the 5th grade, you might have learned waxing crescent, waxing gibbous. Well, Sandy, if you could look, I think I just posted that one today. It's in blue.
That would be a good one. There we go.
Yeah.
This is a perfect one.
Yeah. That you don't have to have a test on which is primary and which is secondary phase. You can just remember, in general, as the moon appears to get larger, that's when we plant things that we eat the part that's above ground. We call them above ground crops. Now, anybody that's ever had a garden or ever pulled up a plant knows all plants have below ground parts and above ground parts. But what is the part that you use? And that's real important when it gets to herbs and trying to decide when do you plant those. If you use echinacea and you're harvesting the root in the fall, you would plant it like a below ground crop. So these are the 3 rules that you need to know for the first half of planting by the signs. My students used to say it comes in 2 parts. After you learn the code, there's 2 parts. The first part's easy. Which moon phase are you in? Is it getting bigger or is it getting smaller? And here are the 3 rules that go with that. Next, they'd say, this is the more difficult part. This is when you have to use that secret decoder ring to know which sign is fruitful and which sign is the killing sign. So let me add a couple of things about these April moon phases. It would be great if every month started with the new moon. I didn't create the moon and I didn't create the calendar system, so I can't make it do that. It doesn't. It kind of mess with your mind. It's the first of the month, reset. No, it just happens that the last quarter of the moon begins April, and it also begins May. And these are our plantings. This is our planting season. And in that last quarter, that waning crescent, when that moon gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it appears to go away, the rules are that you don't plant. Now, sometimes I break that rule, especially in April, May, and June. I'm thinking, 7 days. I can't plant for 7 days. But the rule is you don't plant. That this is the best time to harvest. It's the best time to till, to clear land, and to weed. Now I'm clearing some places from my 2 little garden patches this year, and so anytime in this last quarter, in this waning crescent phase, this is a good time to do that.
And you're doing that next or a couple weeks from now, right? You're having your soil turned.
Yes. And I couldn't get the guy that helps me and the calendar to coordinate. So the honest truth is sometimes you have to do it when you can, and not when this calendar says. And our ancestors did that too. They were depending on their food so they wouldn't starve. So they weren't, about the only thing, this is what I've heard from talking with older people they learned from their parents and their grandparents. They would not plant in a killing sign. And the Foxfire books, which are from North Georgia, and for years and years and years, that was the only place you could go to get information about planting by the signs. They said Aries, the head and the ram, and Leo, the heart or the lion, those were death signs.
Yeah.
You don't plant, you don't have surgery. We're not surgeons. If your doctor tells you to have surgery, I'd say just go for the surgery, especially if it's an emergency. But
if you're pulling poison ivy or you want to get rid of bushes and things like that, kill them. Do it during the killing signs.
Yes. And in the old almanacs, I love to look through old almanacs, and we'll talk about this in July and August, because that is the one time that the sun does come into this. The sun is in Leo, and when the moon is in Leo, and if it's a waning moon, they would say, mow, mow, mow. And think about what farmers were mowing then, what farmers were cutting. It wasn't just weeds. It wasn't just clearing land. They might have been taking in their hay, their grains. So yeah, I will leave it up to you about that last quarter, what you do. I would say, if you plant, decide to plant in that last quarter, I would definitely look for a fruitful sign. Very, very fruitful. And our A+, there is an A+ sign during that time. It's Pisces, fishes, the feet. And I want to say that's coming up this weekend. So if you haven't got your calendar, I don't get anything for telling you about the American Calendar Company out of Greenville, Tennessee. I love that company. I was able to tour it. I just like it because it's a small company. It's been there, I don't know, 130 years. And it's the calendar that I learned on. And that makes a difference. Now, not everybody in Dahlonega, Georgia, that helped us with our seed project, they were not all in agreement. Sometimes someone would lean against the classroom door when the class was in session and say, don't be telling these students to use this almanac. This is the almanac you're supposed to be using. But our classroom was an open classroom in that we invited elders and other people to come in from the community, because we wanted students also to feel free to go out to their fields and their gardens, and to learn from that.
And this isn't too far away from what Rosann and I like to do in our spare time, which has now become almost full time for us, is genealogy. So in a way, the planting by the signs is still just a different part of genealogy. You're researching your own ancestors, or if you move to a new area, the ancestors and the people, the planters that were there before. And like you said, you invited the elders into your classroom. And this is all information, stories that would be gone unless they came in.
Yes. And this is certainly of a folklore tradition. There's a wonderful article It's a peer-reviewed article, so it's probably behind a paywall, but you could probably get it at your library. It's by Kate Black, who's from Kentucky. It's called Kentucky Gardening Traditions. And she just goes around and asks people, why do you garden? What is it? Why do you plant by the signs? And basically it's, well, that's just what we do. That's part of our tradition. And so we've talked about before on here the difference between deep culture and surface culture in anywhere, but especially in Appalachia. Surface culture is something that you can go and visit. You can go to an apple festival, a sorghum festival. Sandy, what are some of the festivals that you've gone
Well,
to?
we have the 𝗕𝗂𝗋𝗋, the Apple Festival. That's the
Yes,
first one I'm thinking of. But then we also have music. We have the bluegrass festivals that are around, and I like the Singing Heart festivals that they have.
yes,
Wow, those are fascinating to me.
yes.
So you're
So,
right.
so surface culture is something that, as a tourist or a visitor, um, or as someone who you're just moving in, we can go and enjoy those things, and we can learn.
Mhm.
But deep culture means that when you start peeling your apples, the first apple you peel to either can or make a pie with, you throw the peel over your shoulder and you look to see, if you're a single woman, you look to see whose initial that peel forms. That's part of deep culture. And you would know that the right time to pick your apples would be in a barren sign. You don't want to pick your apples in a fruitful sign, in a watery sign, because you want them to last.
Mhm.
And that's deep culture. Culture so deep you might not even remember when you learned it.
You
You,
just knew it. You just knew
you
something, like,
just did.
a lot of people will like to throw the salt. I was, speaking to somebody recently about, if you left the house and you were actually out of your house, maybe in your car, and you go, "Shoot, I forgot something," you gotta go back in. My family was like, "You have to sit down for, like, 5 seconds before you leave the house again." Those are things I can't tell you where I learned that, but I can tell you if I didn't do it, I remembered getting told off.
That's deep culture. And one good exercise we would do is students would go out and take a picture of surface culture and take a picture of deep culture. Boy, that gets tricky taking a picture of deep culture.
It does.
Is it a church in the South? We have a church on every corner. That's part of a deep culture. Is that you could probably start singing hymns and other people in the park would start singing that hymn.
Mhm.
We don't think about
It's
how we
part
know this.
Yeah, it's part of us. It's just there.
Yes. And so I want to really full disclosure, I did not grow up planting by the signs. Um, my grandfather did not plant by the signs, and he'd say he lives on the earth, not on the moon, so he's going to plant by what the earth says. He really was very scientific. He paid attention to the extension agent. He enrolled my dad in
Mm.
sweet potato growing and pumpkin growing contests. If um, so he wanted to go to school and couldn't, so he just totally rebuked that. So this is not coming out of my deep culture. This is coming out of a surface culture person moving to North Georgia and learning and getting to know my neighbors.
And being told by somebody driving by who
Yeah,
was the surface or was, excuse me, the deep culture.
yes,
So it finds you.
it does. And it is, and I have come to appreciate planning by the signs so much. It's one of the most elegant and
Mhm.
complex folklore that I know about. Eh, eh, because it is so automatic in the ones who practice. This folk
Mhm.
practices down deep, and sometimes it can be a little tricky for them to explain. And there are other codes too, like if you can't do anything else, plant under the crab.
That's the one I always remember from you.
Yeah, what in the world is that? Um, that means plant when the moon is in Cancer. Plant when the moon is in the breast. Sometimes people will say, if I can't do anything else, And that means I'm going to plant in the breast.
I'm gonna plant the rice. And the bowl is a popular time as well, right?
Yes, I do love Taurus the bull. Um, and I don't think it gets enough credit. When I think of these fruitful signs, like students in a class, you got your A students, they're always going to be an A student no matter what. Then you got your high Bs, and they work so darn hard and they're committed to it. They're probably going to be a solid A minus
Mhm.
by the end of the semester, and you're going to bump them up. That's what Taurus is. It is strong. It is hard. It is an earth sign. My sister's a Taurus. I could tell you stories if you're watching. Joy, I won't tell. Yes. So Taurus is a great sign, and I think we'll talk about this maybe next month. But one of the deep culture sayings was, if you want to, if you know you're going to have a drought, or you're worried about drought, plant your corn in the sign of the bull, because it is supposed to be a drought-proof sign. They said that way before climate change. It will be interesting to see.
I was thinking about when you mentioned how this can be complicated to learn and to put into practice. I have to consult the calendar every day, and I have to not just glance at it, I have to really kind of sit there and study it for a minute. I study the day before, today, tomorrow, and what's coming up past it. And then you mentioned just now, this came up long before we talked about, climate culture. And Appalachians tend to get the stigma of not being very educated. And when we talk about things that they started realizing a long time ago and how complicated this can get, I would say education is one thing, but they were smart. They knew how to survive.
They did survive. That's why we're here. I'm convinced that if I was back in my great grandmother's day, my children would have been naked and hungry, because I could do the weaving and the sewing, and and then
Yeah.
everything you had to do to get food to come to the table. So this food ways, that planting by the signs is a part of the food ways, the way you get food to the table. Today looks very different. I put in my order for Kroger. I don't have to fish it. I don't have to
Yeah.
hunt it. I don't have to pick it. I mean, we're just foodways looks very different.
Yeah, when you put it that way, it's extremely different. And they would wake up, before sunrise, and they're up. And 30 minutes later, we got our grocery order inputted, and they're picking it. They're from
Yeah.
the shelves. So versus they're picking it from the fields. It's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
So I think that if I could have one message, it's to learn the code earlier than I did. It just took me a long, long time to realize
Well,
this is a code. It was a student who told me that. She looked at this and she said, and we were in Foxfire Archives looking at interviews about planting by the signs from 50 years ago. And she said, Miss Kent, this is just a code. And I said, what? She said, yeah, look at this, man. You learn more. I learn more from my students than they learned from me, sometimes I think. But yeah, take time to learn this code. Write it down on a sheet of paper, or have a place that you can look at it. Sometimes the code is so embedded, even if you learn the zodiac sign, the body part, and the symbol, you can still hear things like the signs are going out of the body. And on another planning by the signs Facebook, somebody said, can't you just say that differently? And I had to speak up and say, that's how I've always heard it.
that's all. I don't know any other way to say it because it feels foreign to me.
Yeah.
I would struggle to come up with a different way and be probably a little bit inauthentic. I would not be very authentic at all with it.
Yeah. And I do my best to honor those who taught me,
Yeah.
and to use their words.
Yes.
So the signs going out of the body, you look at this man of signs and you see, sometimes I hear going out of the body behind beyond anything that counts. And so maybe your bowels definitely count. Your loins definitely count. And yeah, our knees are important. You ask somebody that's got a knee replacement or a hip replacement or sprained their ankle, and that they are important. But the important thing is the movement of the signs. They appear, according to this icon that's been around for centuries, they appear to be going out of the body. They appear to be moving in a downward direction. Actually, they kind of move like this through this icon. One of my students graphed it out for me one time. And she said, oh, look, they're moving in a zigzag motion.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So when you think of making changes, I think, oh, I got to lose weight, got to quit smoking, you got to start walking, whatever it is that you want to change in your personal life. But farmers were weaning their cattle. Farmers and they were having to do things that were far beyond our garden. In other words, they would need to know, when are you going to castrate that calf? When are you going to dock those pig's ears?
Yeah.
And you certainly would not want to do that when the sign was in Leo. You would want to do it when the signs were as close to the feet as you could get. So, and you think, oh, well, how is castrating a calf a change? Well, if somebody were to castrate me, that'd be a change. So sometimes these codes are so embedded that until you take the time to talk with someone about it who's actually practiced it, then you go, oh, now I can't say for sure that somebody in West Virginia uses this same language, because our study area for the heirloom seeds we're gathering, it was Western North Carolina. It was Northern Alabama. It was
probably South Carolina.
Yeah, backcountry of South Carolina, North Georgia. It was truly Southern Appalachia. Sandy, if you find anybody from another part of the country who practices this, I would love to.
I'm going to have to dig, because I am so curious to find an Appalachian from New York that does planting by the signs, because they already are very different. Like they will not say Appalachia, they'll say Appalachia. So there's little things like this that we see different between our own culture. So I want to try and pull some of those in from the northern regions, and see. And when I say northern regions, I'm really only really talking about New York, Pennsylvania, mostly in Ohio. Everything else, Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, the Carolinas, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, those kind of all fall into the South. But I can tell you, do not go to, like, for example, West Virginia and say Appalachia, because they will correct you. When I say they, I mean everybody that is within earshot.
Yes.
Correct you. But I can tell you, I've been to Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh does not want to be recognized as that. They want to be the big city, but they are the biggest city in Appalachia. So, but they will embrace it in their own way. They're not against it. They'll just embrace it in their own way. So
that's a great topic, Sandy, on urban Appalachians. We take our culture with us. In the Great Migration of the 40s, when Appalachians were leaving and they're driving out of the mountains into Baltimore, and then on the weekends, they used to say you could hop from car to car to car. There were so many people leaving Baltimore and other large cities trying to get back to the mountains. So do we take our culture with us? Do we take that deep culture? I would argue that you do.
Yeah, I could tell you that on my own family, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, my brother, one of my brothers is still in Maryland. Our family left on Hillbilly Highway, and he gets back to West Virginia as much as he can. But his nickname through his motorcycle club is Hillbilly, because he's got that culture. He's born in West Virginia. He wants to get back. That he's waiting till he retires. But so I agree. your culture comes with you. And that's not just Appalachians, that's everybody that brings their culture.
Absolutely.
So if you move over from Ireland, for example, to, if West Virginia, first off, you'll be embraced, but they'll be like, you talk funny.
Yes.
And you won't lose your culture, but you'll embrace what the people around you. And so then you become your own microculture almost.
Yes. And so one thing we realized is that our cultural heritage is dying.
Mm,
As older people age, and as it doesn't get written down or doesn't
that's
get
it.
webcast,
Yeah.
and other people don't learn it, especially gardening traditions that can be lost in one generation. One generation. People once said to me, "Oh, you're a great gardener." It's like, no, I've grown tomatoes 14 times. I'm like, no, would that make you an expert to play basketball 14 times? No. We're still learning. So it's
But you're right, because this is, like we said, we talk about this being folklore, and yes, okay, it is, but for those that might be watching this that don't understand what planting by the signs really is, or don't really understand maybe even Appalachia or Appalachians, this is so ingrained into our ancestors' life. And as Rosann said a few moments ago, we're here because they planted by the signs. There's some that didn't. I'm not saying everybody, but I'm for real. The majority of Appalachians went by this in some way or form. They learned that when to plant their crops because they learned that from their ancestors, and so on and so on. So that's kind of why we're bringing back this webcast and planting by the signs, so people can try it on your own and see what it's like, see how they did it, but continue this culture. That's important to Rosann and I, to have our culture continued, studied, learned. And who's to say we can improve on it as well? The modern technology is out there, so we can. But I would love to see everybody using heirloom seeds.
yes,
I
yes.
would love to see some of the old ways coming back again, because they worked. We're here. Our ancestors fed us.
And so when I mentioned that this is an elegant folklore system, what I meant by elegant is intricate and things
Mm,
fit together. There's not a bunch of killing signs together. You get the breast, and then you get the lion. So
yeah,
you get the best
very nice.
fatal sign, the A plus student, and
Yeah.
then you get the F minus student, and they're back to back. So a couple of days you're planting, you're transplanting, and then the next day when move signs about every 2.5 days. Um, so you're tilling. So you're killing, you're weeding, you're worried about if you see an odd growth on something. So there is following this calendar will make you a better gardener, even if you don't believe it.
Yeah, that's really the thing. And as Roseanne mentioned, and I love that you mention this every single time. We're not talking about a religion or an astrology that you look up your horoscope and say, "Okay, I'm a Taurus, and this is going to be what happens and predict the future." So I know a few of you out there are like, "We don't practice astrology. We don't believe in that. We don't want a different religion." This has nothing really to do with this. This is really about culture and the way that the crops grew well, and the way to destroy some things that you don't want. So if you don't want something, like we have a lot of poison ivy, husband's out there every time during, the bad sign. He happens to be a Leo too, so it's kind of funny, but he's always out there during the lion
Yes.
and ripping out or trying to get rid of things because it's a killing sign.
I was amazed when we were looking through the archives, Foxfire archives. If you've not looked at the Foxfire books, you can get them at your library. The first one is my favorite. That is the one with the planting by the signs chapter in it. There you begin to see in those archives how much people spent trying to kill things.
Yeah.
I don't mean animals, because there's that too. When do you butcher your hog? When is the meet best. If you do it on a waxing moon, will it all go to grease? I've never butchered a hog before. A student asked me once if she could do that as her project, and I said no.
Yeah.
So just no, I'm sorry. I want mine wrapped in cellophane.
Yeah.
Yeah. But when you think of getting rid of stumps, you don't have a stump remover. When you're clearing land, that was huge. And the ability to clear that land sat between you and starvation. How to deal with pests before we had anything. Well, you pick them off. You learn to identify them in their larval stage, and you get them a 10 cans of kerosene and you start dumping them in that.
Yep.
So they did spend, I mean, I would be looking for planting by the signs, and they might just mention it, but then there would be pages and pages and pages and pages about how to clear this land, about how to burn. There's a lot of burning going on in the mountains
and that was still planting by the signs. You know, when we say planting, I think people think, okay, put my tomato in, put my, marigolds in or my roses, but it's also, as Rosann has mentioned many times, when, maybe go to dentist because you'll bleed less or bleed more, but you got to go to dentist, but it's not just planting, it's also better preparing your grounds, your crop, crop rotation, the animals that are taking care of them on the farm. So this was a culture that they live by. And as we've said many, many times, most of our grandparents have had this calendar like very near the back door. And the reason why mine was that my grandparents had a back door is because that was the way to the farm.
Yeah, that's right.
It's straight to the farm. So they would look at it the night before, every day before they left and on the way to the farm. And that's how they would do it. So Rosann, if I'm looking at this, so I'm going to plant on around for the plant above a ground. I'm going to plant around the 15th.
Yeah, that's it. Anytime between the new moon and the full moon, and find a fruitful sign, find a fertile sign. For some people call it fertile, some people call it fruitful. One of your signs, you've got Taurus in there. You've got Cancer in there. So this is a really good period. You also have something that breaks the rules, and that is the bean pea sign of Gemini, the arms. You'll see that as the arms. And another sign is when do you plant your peas or beans, and some people will raise their arms like this.
Oh, yeah.
Planting it in the sign of the twins, planting it in the arms. And that makes no sense to me. And every time I ask, nobody knows, because it is a barren sign. And then someone on your podcast from the last time pointed out the Hermetic tradition, as above, so below.
That was Eric, and I think he's here too.
Yeah, and I have thought about that so much because this Hellenistic period is when this man of signs, it was really going. It was popular. People knew about it. So yeah, that would make sense that some of these that seem to break the rules. Because if I ask somebody, they'll say, well, you plant your beans when the signs are in the arms. But that is a barren, airy sign. So it's not water, it's not earth, it's not even fruitful. Why would you plant that? I've heard one person tell me they also planted their cucumbers for the same reason. They wanted them to grow high.
Interesting.
So if you're planting beans, and what good Appalachian can have a garden without beans?
Beans, yeah.
Yeah, those are the great 2 days. There's an interesting period for flowers, which is the bowels and the loins. Isn't that just? I mean, I got kicked off Facebook one time because they saw that in my post. I don't know what they thought I was talking about, but I wasn't.
Well, you put the bull, the breast, the bowels. It does get people thinking.
I knew this one was going to get me, but so far so good. Those signs, we would say Virgo and Libra, those signs all come together. And those are the signs for flowers. Those are the blooming signs, the the vining signs. And so those are the times that you really want to plant your flowers. I'm growing more flowers this year than ever before. Mostly because I ripped up my mom's shrubs. I haven't
Need
told
to
my
replant
sister
it.
that yet. I ripped up the shrubs, sister. And I'm gonna plant, I'm gonna try planting beans and flowers, just kind of putting it all together right outside the
A
front
hybrid.
door.
I like that.
Yeah, and see what that is.
So then when should we plant the flowers? What days? Around what days?
That is on that will I'm sorry. I don't have my calendar in front of me, but you'll want to plant that. You'll want to look for vowels. You'll want to look for virgin, and you will want to look for loins and scales. And that's your Virgo and your Libra period. That
That's what we'll do.
the back of the calendar, whatever calendar you get, make sure that it has a back with the instructions.
Yeah.
Now, if nobody tells you decode this first, I bet I read that a million times before I realized it was a code. But it has a little special section on flowers, and it says, do you want to save the seeds that of these flowers that you're planting? If so, do it between the new and the first quarter. They split it down to there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm gonna have to go look at my calendar because we planted. I'll say we're kind of now. I'm kind of like Rosann. I'm right now getting the gardens ready, and you in about a week or two, about 2 weeks, you're gonna have somebody come and turn all your soil,
Yes.
get it all ready, and this is kind of what we've been doing. And I want to just point out this weird little picture in the middle. This was the start of pollen. And now the pollen has gone over to cover up this whole area, pretty much. So we call this a multi-allergy day
Yes.
down here in Georgia. But I have my little helpers here. Well, my husband is replanting. So this is a question I have. So when we talk about planting, that means replanting as well in general.
Yes. And there's a man in Kentucky who's been doing this longer than I have, and he learned the same way. His name of his Facebook is called Planting by the Signs. And he says that when you say planting, that means putting a seed in the ground. That means taking out something out of one pot and putting it in a larger pot. That means anything to do with the ground, whether it's a seed or whether you're moving it from a pot to a pot, another pot, transplanting, all of that is under planting.
Did that because you just answered my second question. So this is my husband replanting one of my limelights that I had, a miniature limelight. But here, this big, ugly, spiky thing, that's my hostas. And you can tell that I have not separated them in a very long time. So that would be also, when we talk about planting, if you're going to go and break them apart and separate them, then that would still be, you look for fruitful.
That's my understanding now.
That's mine too. Okay, I thought so.
𝗕𝗂𝗍𝗶 out of Planting by the Signs. I'll ask him. He's always my go-to when there's something that I don't know. I'll jump on Facebook and ask him.
And I agree with you. That's what I thought too. It didn't. And many of you will recognize Lola. She's always in my webcast. Sound asleep, ignoring me. But I don't know if this. I bought 2 plants last year. This is one of them with the purple. I don't know if this is my lilac that I bought. I think, but I don't know. But the one thing I wanted to mention, because this was a big topic for a lot of people last year around our area in Georgia, but I know it does happen all over the states where you get cold, is your hydrangeas. And if you get one of those late frost, cover your hydrangeas or else you will not have blooms.
Yes.
And that's what happened to many of us up and down Appalachias. We did not cover. We got a late frost around April 8th or something like that. And I did not get any blooms. But as you can see, I'm starting to get a little bloom already. And I'm protecting my hydrangeas like mad because they are beautiful. But boy, they are challenging little ladies.
The frost dates, when you think of how ancestors kept up with frost dates, They couldn't log in to a weather
Yeah.
station on a college campus, but back then the back of the calendars were blank and had blank squares, so they would track rainfall. I love to look at somebody who's kept these
Yeah.
calendars. They would rainfall, their frost date, and you have piles of these, and that's data. You're gathering data. Now,
That is
my
in a way.
grandfather did do that. He didn't plant by the science, but he used the calendar to keep up with his
Because
planting data.
he was a scientist by heart. That's
Yeah.
what he loved. So that's interesting. So now what you just did is you've taken folklore into something that has data into science and pulling it together. Isn't that kind of interesting how you just made that entire thread?
Yeah. Well, I can't say this is science. I have seen and I have looked for peer-reviewed articles where research was duplicated. And it may be that this is such an elegant, complex. I mean, how would you break down your variables?
Yeah.
And
then, like you said, we've had so many regions. Well, we're talking about Appalachia because that's what we know. That's where our YouTube channels are about, and that's what we know. But as Rosann's mentioned many times, over in Europe, they have their own planting by the science, and their calendars are different because their climate and their elements are different.
And they go by a different zodiac. In Appalachia, we go by the tropical zodiac, although nobody would say that. I had to spend 2 years studying Hellenistic astrology to understand that there's a tropical zodiac and a sidereal zodiac. And sidereal is really closer to where the planets actually are because of the precession of the equinox. It's not where it used to be. And those and astrologers can argue about that till the cows come home. In Appalachia, we just argue about, no, I like this almanac. No, I like this calendar because this is what I was taught on, and my eyes don't take in an almanac. Almanacs are too busy for me. However, I know some of our elders loved almanacs, and that would be the first thing they would introduce our students to, is how to use this almanac. But it's still encoded. As many almanacs, I bet I've looked at hundreds, and only one, Turner's Almanac out of Raleigh, North Carolina, has one little piece of instructions about planting by the sun. Light moon, dark moon, above ground, below ground. That's printed in the little box at the top. So that's how deep this culture went. An almanac, a calendar, it was in every home, like the Bible.
I know. I was thinking we made it. We were in the almanac. We made it.
It was so deep that everybody knows that. I guess it would be like us defining Google.
It would.
When we're talking about, I wrote down Google that. And people 200 years now going, what is that Google thing?
Just invest in Google. We rich. We couldn't go back in time to our ancestors. But so Rosann, give us a little bit of a highlight. What can we expect for May? So May is going to also be a big planting. This is kind of getting your garden ready. May is pretty big planting, right?
So May and June, I went ahead and picked out the most fruitful signs, and I think that's on my Instagram. I posted April, May, and June fruitful signs, and that's just a big overview. But people will be planting right up in June. Up. By the time you get to July, it's like everything heats up again. It's so hot, and you're saving seeds in August, and you might have time to get in a fall crop then. But this next, like you said, April, May, and June, that's our time. So make sure and check out that Instagram post, Spring Planting Preview.
And keep in mind that all the links that we talk about and all the links for Rosann are down below. And I need to tell you that I do have an inside track to Rosann, and I bug her constantly. Can I plant? Can I plant? And if you'd like to bug her too, her information contact is down below in our description as well. And I will, before we leave, I will let Rosann give you one sage advice that she gave me about a week ago when I was like, can I please plant? And she told me that I had to go outside the garden and do something specific. I
Yeah.
don't know. So what was that one thing?
Yeah, well, we called it the butt test. Really because we couldn't afford a soil thermometer. Our program was not funded ever, and so we had to raise all of our money. And so one of our seed keepers and one of our planting by the sign elders said, "Oh, just tell them to go out and sit down in that garden for 15 minutes, and they get up, and if their butt's wet and muddy, it's too cold to plant."
Not
And
time
I
yet.
thought, that's a money-saving device. I never bought a soil thermometer. Go sit. And one student said, "Naked?" It's like, no, keep your pants on. Just that's the idea. Do your pants get wet? Does your butt get cold? No, yeah. So yeah, 20 somethings. It was always something new.
Yeah,
And
they always would give you alternatives, I imagine.
it was so much fun learning this with them. It was
That's a
really
good point. They were thirsty. They wanted to learn this.
Yes, they wanted to learn. When on my evaluations, they would say, "She didn't teach us to can applesauce, or she didn't teach us to dry apples." Who knew that that's what they really, really
Really
wanted? And
wanted.
it was the
Yeah.
guys as much as the women wanted to learn these skills.
So it's interesting as we go through this, and I can tell you, I already have a sneak peek of the fall in the end of the year too. So you're going to love Rosann's tips for planting by the sign. Every month, we're going to come back to you with what dates are good for what purpose you're doing on your own property, and then give you a sneak peek. If you have pictures, send them. Rosann's pictures are going to be next month, and as you know, turning the soil, some people will call it, get a rototiller out there and do it however you want to call it. But Rosann's going to show us her garden next month as well. As always, thanks, Rosann. This was great.
Thank you.
And
Bye-bye,
thanks,
everybody.
everybody. We'll see you next time.
Okay, bye-bye.